Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Well, hello and welcome to episode 9 of the podcast. Today we have a conversation with a friend of mine, Kevin Monahan. Kevin's the NextGen Pastor at 12 Stone Church in Atlanta, Georgia. They're a multi-site church, 9 campuses, about 18,000 people attending there. In fact, actually in the post last week in that episode notes, I put that they launched 4 campuses in one day. And I was wrong because they didn't launch 4 campuses in one day. They launched 5 campuses in one day, right? Because, 4 campuses is easy. Anybody could do four campuses, but 5 campuses in one day. We actually don't talk a whole lot about that. So if you are a multi-site and you would love to hear more about how they did that, we do talk about it in the beginning, but you could always reach out to Kevin. That would be a great thing. We talk about a lot of the free resources that his church shares, and you can get that and everything else in the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 9. Before we jump in, I just want to highlight a podcast review that somebody left for the podcast. It was left by Iowa guy Nick Johnson, I believe. Nick, thanks for leaving a review. That means a lot, and a rating on iTunes. That's really helpful. And specifically, Nick said, great name, by the way, he said that there's great material and ideas to implement. And I'm glad you say that because that's the goal. The goal isn't just to have good conversation about principles or philosophies or things like that. I love that. I could do that forever, and you probably could too. But I want there to be ideas, practical things that you can walk away with and do to help your ministry and help your leadership. So that's the goal. And I'm even going to try to start sharing, kind of summarizing at the end and after the interview, what some of those action items could be. So I have 3 or 4 of those today coming out of this interview with Kevin that I think you'll like, and steps that you can take to really apply this to your ministry. So without further ado, let's get to my interview with Kevin Monahan. Well, today I'm joined by my friend Kevin. Kevin, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Nick. It's good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, tell us about yourself, Kevin, your family, and your church.
Sure. Well, I get the honor and privilege to serve at 12 Stone Church. We're here in Atlanta, Georgia. And I get to work kind of from newborns all the way through college and young adults, serving with the student pastors and the children's pastors, directors, part-time, full-time people, kind of a mix of staff. And so we're a church for probably about 18,000 individuals each weekend, and have about 9 campuses, and probably expand a few. I think probably our most interesting fact, as you kind of know, is in January of 2015, we launched 5 new campuses on the same day. So
and you survived. Yeah, you survived it.
And we survived, man. It was a lot of planning and a lot of work, but we felt like, man, that's what God called us to do, and wanted to get into these communities. And we had about 3,500 volunteers and 12 stoners kind of step up and go kind of plant some of these campuses, all done in schools, man. So they're all portable. We've got 3 out of 5 will be in permanent facilities by hopefully, you know how construction goes, by the first of the year, man. So that's kind of what we're getting at. And
wow, that's fast. If I could jump in there, is that 2 years or 3 years?
Yeah, well, we've got one. They're kind of remodeling a Best Buy. So that's kind of a remodel. Another one, we honestly, it's just kind of been the hand of God. One of them is a local hospital that had some extra land and actually approached us of kind of building very close to them. It's kind of in a growing area, and wanted for us to be able to kind of be there. And then the other one is we have a city named Buford, great local community here, but like it's they were building their high school and asked us the same thing, to kind of partner with them and build kind of a facility on their campus. And then we kind of share their parking lot on the weekends, and they share ours during the week. And, so it's been, we believe a lot in partnering with the local communities and seeing where the need is and stuff like that. And so, the other 2, man, there's no real set plans, and we just kind of wait to see where God's working and kind of match up with that. And, and get at it when the opportunity arises.
Yeah, that's cool. And it sounds like, I'm up here in Maryland and in the Northeast. It's hard. Churches have to fight a lot, even to get in schools. There's even a law now you can be in schools, but now they have rules where after so many years you have to be out, or you pay a rent that is more than you would pay to lease the same size space. So it's tough. But we have found if you can, develop a relationship somewhere and build trust, then individually you're fine. And I imagine that's probably what's happening with you guys. Is you guys have been there long enough, you're large enough that you've established a reputation that says we want to work with them, which is great. Yeah. That's not what most churches get early on. Yeah.
No, I think you're right on. I think that's the history of the church, of being so involved with the community, that we have a positive reputation. And we try to realize, man, we're stepping into their ground, and we want to serve them and serve the community and make their school better. We're in two public high schools, two public elementary schools, and then one private Christian school for one of the campuses. So yeah, man, it's really helpful. We want to make them better, and I think they know that. And man, when you've got a great partnership and a good relationship, it's difficult. I mean, we had to look several different places and kind of do our due diligence. But man, once you kind of land where God wants you, and if you can add value to them, it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, definitely. So tell us a little bit about the family ministry team that you lead. Spread out all over 9 campuses. Like, what does that look like structurally?
Yeah. Okay, so with that, when you kind of birth 5 campuses at one time, it gets a little complicated. So,
I can imagine having 5 kids. Like,
exactly.
It's a little complicated.
Sure, and especially when you already have 4 kids.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're just out of control.
Yeah. And so, I've been here about 4.5 years at 12 Stone. And when I got here, we were only 3 campuses, and they were about to launch the 4th. And so, it's been kind of like a steady process of kind of taking the individual kind of setup of family ministry and how we set it up. So, although we're in transition now and had to adapt, our structure is pretty simple. I'm really currently the only NextGen pastor that works with all 9. So everybody else is specifically campus specific. I have a part-time lady that actually helps me with purchasing goods and materials for all campuses. But other than that, within the family ministry, everybody has a campus that they serve on and go in. My job, I kind of bounce around different campuses, kind of fill in gaps. I'm a liaison between communications and NextGen, business and NextGen. And I kind of work a lot with the campus pastors to make sure that they have everything they need to make stuff happen. So that's it. I mean, it's funny because people are like, man, such a big church, you kind of assume that there's a big staff. But for us, it's like, I currently only have about 5 full-time people for about 3,800 kids. And so which is so lean and so low, but man, we pour into a lot of part-time people, some contract work, some temporary work. We outsource some different kind of opportunities and do all that. So, I mean, our setup is I have a children's pastor at our central campus who kind of helps lead. He's got 3 full-time people with him that kind of create our curriculum, our policies and procedures, and then kind of export those out to the campus. I have one other campus, Hamilton Mill campus, that has a full-time person, but that's it. And so the other ones are all kind of part-time people. Student ministry is a little different. We've got 5 full-time student guys to help those. But I mean, those are guys that, man, each of them are serving 200 to 300 students at some campuses, and then the part-time guys are usually part-time worship guys and helping with students. So we're a lean model church. I think it kind of starts with that. We don't do a lot of midweek stuff for adults other than small groups and homes, and we've only got like 2 or 3 major events a year when it comes to students. So that's another kind of aspect of 12 Stone that I think is unique. So
yeah, and you have a lot of part-time staff, but again, a lot of them are very part-time. Isn't it like 60 total staff?
Yeah.
But so, you have a lot of 10-hour a week, isn't that right?
We do. So one of the unique things about 12 Stone 2 is we have a residency, which is a 2-year program for I call them kids, even though most of them are 21, but that once they finish college, they come for 2 years with us and kind of get ministry with oversight in what they do. And so they're kind of spread out. The majority of those 26 residents are in NextGen. And then it's a really great program. We kind of train them out and then send them out to churches all over the place. You can get more information at that at like churchresidency.com, which is a great website to kind of see them. But so that's part of it. But we have a lot of 10-hour people. And Nick, this is what's really cool about the 10-hour people is they're easy to train because they're just 10 hours. You can give them one or two kind of things. And the way that we kind of divide it up is, man, you're about people. We always want to be about people. And so that's recruiting volunteers, scheduling volunteers, loving on them. You know, if you're at a smaller campus and you're a 10-hour person, you may have 30 volunteers, and that's reasonable to like phone call half of them 1 week and then phone call the other half the next week. Make sure they have coffee or have a face-to-face with at least 5 of them in a month. You can email the rest of them during the week or text them and just be in constant care. We want them to develop and to grow, and you're kind of the shepherd for that. And the other half is just kind of executing the program we give you. I mean, these people aren't shopping. They're not going to the store and buying stuff because I have somebody that does that. They just they get all their materials and goods and what they need. Of course, they've got some things like office supplies and some stuff they have to maybe buy on their own. But the rest is, man, the bulk of it is done kind of by myself and this lady Micah, who does such a great job in organizing, you know, goods and services and stuff like that. So we've tapped into a lot of this. I mean, some college students, man, they just need 10 extra hours. A lot of stay-at-home moms, which have been really great, man. I love the stay-at-home moms, especially if they had a career before they were staying at home, and they just love their church and they're excited and they still got drive and they want to get out of the house a little bit, you know, and man, they're just excited about ministry and still have a great entrepreneurial spirit. And then the plus about a 10-hour employee too is if something happens, some life event, they get, you know, some of them get pregnant again or they graduate from college. It's not the end of the world. You have to find a 40-hour person. You can just find a 10-hour person that can kind of help and give leadership. We always want to make sure that our people are taken care of across the board. So, man, that's exciting.
That's good. And today we want to talk about how to like manage all of that, right? Because most of us aren't in churches of 18,000 or whatever where you have that many staff. Sure. But most of us are in settings where we're managing multiple teams of volunteers. So even if a church of 200, somebody might have 20 volunteers. Mm-hmm. And kind of like you were saying, your part-time people could invest in those 20 or 30 personally. But still, if the church is going to grow, you're going to hit a point where you can't invest in 50 volunteers, right?
Correct.
You can't invest in 200 volunteers.
That's right.
So in the same way that most of us are leading volunteers through multiple teams, you're doing that through multiple staff members and things like that. How does that look practically? Because especially there are a lot of advantages, like you said, of part-time staff, but one of the disadvantages might be that there's so many of them. It might be harder to lead. So how do you lead them all? Like, how does the reporting work?
Yeah. So
all that?
I think part of it is, you know, you can call it vision, you can call it theology, but all that stuff honestly, it does start from developing kind of this biblical theology of service. You know, I mean, understanding what the priesthood of the believer, Ephesians 4, you know, talking about like that all of us are called to serve and all of us have different unique gifts. So I know that just sounds really churchy and stuff, but understanding that vision helps everybody realize that, listen, I am not called just to run a program. I'm not there just to worry about Sunday. I'm there to carry about the rest of the week and to care about this volunteer and to get the right people in the right places. So if you believe that all of them are called, and everybody's gifted. I mean, you look at, you know, 1 Corinthians talk about how that the Holy Spirit gives everybody a certain service for the church. I really think, you know, you can't discredit what vision and direction is and understanding. I think that's a really great place. So you know what they need to do. It's more like when you start moving to practical, it's like, all right, so how do I make that happen? So for us, I think there's an aspect of, man, we don't want to get just swamped with meetings and all of that kind of stuff because it can happen. I will tell you, the higher that you go up at 12 Stone, the more you are in meetings. So like the majority of my day is meetings because then you kind of get information, disseminate it out and send it out. But like, so we kind of have this hierarchy. So if you're a volunteer, you know, if say you're one of, it's almost like a military kind of aspect of like, okay, so if you're one of 40 volunteers for children's ministry at our Brazelton campus, you know who your coach is. So it may be a 10-hour person, and Jennifer Davis is one of our 10-hour employees at our Brazelton campus. So I'm just going to use this as an example. But she's got her 40, 50 volunteers that she's calling and leading and all this stuff. But the challenge to her is like, even within your first year, is to get you a right-hand person that helps you, guy or gal that can help you care for them. So she's now, even with a year, got 2 solid coaches that helps her do what she needs to do and do all of that stuff. So these volunteers are not only hearing for Jennifer from coaching and caring, but got other coaches. And so now Jennifer has a coach. So she's got her campus pastor that meets with her, every other week, that just talks about details and all of that stuff. She's got a coach from another campus that may be a 20-hour person in the closest anchor campus. The anchor campuses are buildings that people that have buildings. She's got somebody pouring in her. We have once a month, I try to get all 61 NextGen people, part-time, full-time people in the room to do a NextGen training. And I lead that, but it's also it's 10, 15 minutes of teaching, but it's also 20 minutes of table groups. And you're meeting with other children's people or other student people or other worship people or other production people that are just like you. And so it's kind of that 360 interview of okay, I have multiple people that I can go to. I'm well informed. So the training part is how do we do that? Those kind of I have people I can go to. I think some of the other resources that we use, and I use that word resources because, about this, is we have our website that's free to everybody, resources.12stone.com, which has about 10,000 documents on there that has everything of past sermon series, how we view social media, budget things. And it's kind of our gift to the local church. And to anybody who wants it, you can go on there and get free resources. But it started as for how do we communicate to the 10-hour person, because they're not sitting with us. Well, we created resources.12stone.com in order for them to go on there and download. How do I do this? And now this is kind of elevated in the last few months. We have another thing that's not open to the public, but it's more internal, but it's support@12stone.com. And it's basically answers questions about what you got to do. We've made little videos from our phone, how do I log into ProPresenter? What do I do if I get logged out of MP, which is our database management? Who do I call if I feel like there's some kind of a child endangerment or mandatory reporting issue? All of these handful of questions that we can put in a 1-minute video. And dude, we've just seen even in the last few weeks, sometimes it's just information, right? People just want information. But at the same time, it's the information side. We also have the intimacy side. People want to feel like they're part of a team. So that's where the coaching aspects come in, is that there is individual coaching. And to be honest, although some of these people are 10 hours, I know the week that they come to my training kind of thing, my global training once a month, they may be paid that week an additional 2 or 3 hours because they're here at the campus for that meeting and other. So it is 10 hours, but most of them, even if that's 40 hours a month, will end up somewhere around 45 because they may have some other coaching things. We do something here called Year One, and it's once you've been here a year, there's this this is for our whole church. There's a 6-week deal where that comes over 6 months, and it's the first Monday of every month. And we do a lunch for everybody who's been there, who's been there at least a year, and we train them in development, and that starts the next year. So there's all of these kind of opportunities, whether it's over a meal, whether it's over that. And honestly, man, if there's one thing I can say is staff your people, that can help your staff with people, is to make sure that you have finances that match that vision. One of the, when I go to people, we hire and say, hey, you're a 10-hour person. You have a little bit of money to kind of do incidentals. But honestly, a lot of them get money to take people out for coffee, to pay for meals with 3 or 4 of their leaders, to have volunteer kind of once a month, I'm going to bring everybody lunch on Sunday. And because we just believe, man, sitting across from the table with somebody or doing, I want you to spend money on other people. And if you do that and build that relationship, you get great employees and great volunteers.
That's good stuff. And so what I'm hearing too with how this works altogether, I see there's the relational side, like you're talking about. People have coaches and people that serve in the same role at other campuses and their campus pastor, and you at the monthly NextGen meeting. They're all pouring in, so they're learning from all those sources. And then also you have, I'll call them systems, where you have the resources website, the support website, and you've defined what is our system for running ProPresenter? What is our system? I've been to the resources site. It's awesome. Everybody should go there and downloaded stuff there. And I remember even seeing one where it was designed for your staff, of course. So it was specific about, hey, when you're doing this event, here's what the setup looks like. Yeah. So then people don't have to make it up for themselves, which some might do it worse. Some might do it better, but a lot of people would not do it as well. Depends on their gifting. So you define it. How did that happen? Because I know that takes time. A lot of people, they want good systems, but boy, they're boring to create, right? To write a document about how to lead maybe a new class for incoming kindergartners is kind of boring. But how did you guys create it? Did you just do it and then somebody documented and then save it?
Well, if I told you there was like some really great system to create system, I'd be lying to you. I think necessity is the mother of all inventions. I think that's true in our system. I do want to tell you this. I think that we've had some really great volunteers that are in the business world. And man, they do this for their job. And I've had to actively recruit and say, listen, can I take you to lunch? Would you give? And I kind of just say where we're at. And it's amazing, man. It's like, I'm in the middle of remodeling my basement. It takes forever. For me to hang drywall takes forever. But like I had a guy that came over and like in an hour, he could do what would take me 10 hours. He just knows the tricks of the trade. And there are people in all of our churches that can do that. They help with systems. And there's confidentiality, people, human resources side, the financials, the budget and the people, like I got to keep that on lock. But I think the other aspect is, man, like I've got some great people that do this for Delta and for Chick-fil-A and for, and even their small business. And so like I've earnestly sought that out. And so they come in and how do we do this? I think for us, it's kind of been, some of it's a little touch and go and how do we make that, how do we go with that and learning from different people. But I mean, quite honestly, man, it's still a work in progress. And for, some of that stuff you look and it's been up there. If it's been up there for 6 months, it's probably been changed, because we've had to adapt and we've had to look and sometimes it makes in there. But I mean, honestly, I think some of it is as you start assessing your organization and reviewing like, hey, what are we doing that's right? And then having honest conversations about this isn't working. I think so many people are so concerned about like, well, we've always done it that way. Or this is what Kevin said. Like, I want to be told I'm wrong if I'm wrong. Like I think having that openness of the leader, and a mantra of mine is best idea wins. So how do we do that? I think the other aspect is, man, writing out job descriptions for even volunteers. And what do we do? Helps create processes. Because then everything's in process. It gets complicated if only 50% of your ministry is in a process, because that means the other 50% isn't. And so then you're trying to communicate with something that's in a process and not in a process. It gets complicated. I mean, a lot of our volunteers, man, have tons of responsibility. Like if you walked on our campus on a Sunday, you would have a hard time knowing the difference between staff and a volunteer. My kids couldn't tell you who our children's pastor is because they would be like, oh, maybe it's this person. And I want them to feel like that. Maybe because there's multiple people with multiple gifts pouring into their lives. But even looking, they have job description as volunteers. The difference is, man, like I don't have to pay them. And I have to deal with politics. They would say the great thing about it is I know what I'm doing. It's defined what I'm going after. I get to work at the church and serve in a way that's productive and focused. But at the same time, I don't have to deal with like 15 meetings and politics and W-2 forms and some of the other reasons, that like the church polity that just gets confusing. So like, man, I think you just have to start and just keep moving and being open enough to like, okay, man, let's start this and let's improve this kind of vehicle of information and processing as we go. And every year, man, you got to take hard evaluations and look, man, are we doing this right? Is this the best thing to help us go farther, faster?
So even like you mentioned job descriptions, that's probably a good example. That's almost in essence a system as well, because you're saying this is how you lead in this role. This is the system for leading in this capacity. Mm-hmm. So that's important, creating those for volunteer roles.
Sure.
But I'd love to hear, especially again with so many people that you lead, you don't have a lot of meetings. That's something I know about your culture from our conversations. Yeah. You do in your role, because like you said, the higher up, and that's true of every pastor that I know of in any church. The larger the church gets, regardless of the ministry, you just get more meetings, and they can, as long as they're good meetings, that's the way it should be. Yeah. But you don't want your 10-hour people spending 8 hours of meetings a week or even 5. So it sounds like how you help them do their job well and stay in line with what you want from a vision standpoint. There's probably more to it I'd love to dig into. So some of it's the job description, being real clear about this is your job, right? And you mentioned a year in, there's the 6 Mondays over 6 months or whatever. You're getting some training, so that's helpful. What happens in the onboarding though? Because I think even as we onboard volunteers, I think about what do we need to do to set our volunteers up well early on, as soon as they're coming on board, so that they don't need training every month, because they got it well when they came
Sure.
on. What do you do there?
Well, I think that to kind of go back with what we said, we want to connect them with relationships. So one of the things we do when we have new staff, even if they're 10 hours, we bring them to our central campus to spend. We have a 9, 11, and a 1 at the central campus. So even before they may even go to their campus, although most of them have volunteers, I can't remember the last time we have hired somebody that wasn't a volunteer, a very active volunteer, even a coach moved to the coaching kind of level or a service coordinator level at our campuses. But we do, during the onboarding process, we bring them here to our central campus. And Ned Gable, who's our children's pastor here, who just does a fantastic job, in my mind is one of the best in the country as far as like processes and training. They shadow him and the team for the 9, 11, and the 1 for a few reasons. First of all, to see and to know what's happening, but also to build relationships so that if something happens in the middle of their campus, like they go back to their campus the next week, they have somebody that they can call and be like someone who knows exactly what they're doing. Because if they can call me, but I don't know the intimate detail. I'm not paid to know the exact intimate details of what happens on that. But there is somebody else, and they have that relationship. So it's the informational side, it's the relational side. But then so onboarding, real quick, they come to Central Campus, they get trained. We've kind of created that as like a teaching hospital for us, and we're getting better at this. But the second week, somebody goes out to their campus for their 2 services to make sure that everything flows. Because sometimes, the classroom in the real life sometimes gets a little, disingenuous. But I think that those kind of things really helped, because then it's kind of that mentality of like, okay, you watch me, and then I go and watch you, and then you do it on your own, and then I go find somebody else. So it's that constant set of training. I think the other thing too, Nick, is that like there's a few reasons why people like burn out, and we try to like get that ahead of time. I think it's the fear of like, hey, what do I know? What do I need to do? I mean, that's the biggest question. Like, what do I need to do? And how do I know if I'm doing a good job? Most people want to know if they're doing a good job, but man, the truth is, and I mentioned this a little bit at Orange, like a lot of us use the same vocabulary, but a different dictionary. Like if I said, hey, what's a healthy small group look like? You may have a different definition than I do. And there's no right or wrong, but it looks different in the context of that church. So, I mean, like if you can minimize that fear and know exactly what they know exactly what they're going to do and what they're responsible for, that looks great. I mean, we do things like maps. I know you've seen those, like we with people and say, here are some goals for the next 6 months for you to go after. Man, maybe it's like you got 20 volunteers, and maybe it's like, I just want to get 25 active volunteers. I want to increase this. I want to be able to do that. I mean, that happens. I mean, I think the other thing that burns them out is lack of appreciation, man. We are super intentional about appreciating their volunteers, making them feel that they're cared, making them feel that they're heard. Like, man, if you haven't heard from your volunteers, I'll tell you a very practical way that we do this. I mean, we use Wufoo a lot. I know you can use SurveyMonkey or any of those other online things. But to our volunteers, what did you think about this? We do 2 trainings where we get everybody, all our volunteers, about 800-900 volunteers on all of our campuses. We do it in the winter, and then we do like a kickoff at the beginning in like August. But man, we are active about sending out a Wufoo form. Rate it. Tell us, was it helpful? Was this? And you're always going to have some people that it's great no matter what, and some people that are a little bit of naysayers. But like, we want to hear from them. People want to be felt that they're heard. It gives us fresh vision. Where are we going at a church? Because we don't want somebody to feel like they're a babysitter. We want them to feel like they're an owner in our ministry, and give them that kind of responsibility without authority. They want to feel like, man, hey, I'm responsible for this, but I also have the authority to make a change, like, man, giving them that's important. And, so, I mean, I think those things really help. I mean, we send Wufoo forms. Every one of our volunteers in children's ministry get every one of our volunteers in children's ministry get a Wufoo form every Monday morning from one of our admins here, and it just basically says, man, here's a help desk thing. Did everything go okay? Was there a problem with check-in? Was there a problem with facilities? Was there a problem with the delivery of your stuff? And if so, tell us what went wrong. And then I get that, our children's person gets that. And it's just for us to sit there and say, okay, man, how can we help? And yeah, man, I mean, they do that for volunteers too, man. We wear woofu out, man, trying to make sure that everybody has that. And you always got to ask, smart questions, you got like, do you like the senior pastor is a horrible question to ask, but like,
yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
I think it's kind of fun. Or maybe, do you like Kevin? Like,
yes, exactly.
No.
That's it. So like, that's the stuff that gets a little complicated is you got to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Did you say you send that every week? Like, so every volunteer gets it every Monday, or is it
No, that's every staff person gets that every Monday.
Every staff person. Okay.
Yep.
And we had a podcast we recorded with Frank Beeler, who we both know, and they do the same thing. They call it hits and misses, but it's like the same thing. And I think that's a great principle. Again, you guys are in large churches, but I think any size church should have some kind of system of feedback like you're talking about, where volunteers, like you're talking about staff, but even if you have 30 volunteers and one staff person, you can hear from those 30 volunteers, maybe it's monthly. When food form goes out, like that's really helpful, right? And of course you got to read it and do something, with it.
Yeah,
but you're
parents too, man.
Yeah.
And especially, because in children's ministry, you're ministering, especially when they're younger, man, you're ministering to the parents more probably than the kids, So, we do something where we go about every 90 days and I send an email out that says, hey, saw that you visited 12 Stone within the last 90 days and just want to see how your experience is. And it's real simple. You only get like maybe 15, 20% of the inquiries back. But the thing is you're going to get the person who, really, hides behind their keyboard and tells you what it is, who may not tell you in their face. But at the same time, man, if you see a pattern, I look for patterns more than incidences. So it's like, man, if you start seeing this pattern of like, I had no idea where to go from the parking lot. I had no idea. I got lost in the park. That challenges me to go and say, okay, man, like I'm going to pull up to this campus while I'm parking and thinking I'm a single mom in my minivan. And how do I take that up? Like, do I know where to go? And, man, if that's not clear for like 3 or 4 people, then it's just not clear enough, even though it may be clear for us, So
yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Let me ask you,
Sure.
you guys share everything. Is there a way that we could link in the show notes? Could you send me like a copy of the WooFoo form that you send to staff or even one of those parent
Sure.
new 90 days
yeah,
thing?
Man, I'll be happy to send you the exact one. Well, you know what? I'll PDF copy and send it to you because I'd hate to send the direct link and then people fill it out.
Yeah. We won't do that. Yeah, we'll do the PDF and post it because people could use that, create their own. I think that'd be helpful.
Oh, and it's real simple. And we have to. That's the beautiful thing about WooFoo is you can edit that out. And man, I'd love to hear. Frank Beeler and Elevation, they do some awesome stuff too. And I think what you're doing is the key to it too, man. Is learning from other people. Like if you're not consistently trying to figure out like. Learn from. We've begged, borrowed, and stole most of our stuff. Even if you looked at resources.12stone.com, you'd be like, "Hey, that looks like New Spring." Probably is. Hey, that looks like Christ Fellowship.
That's good.
Hey, that's Will, and vice versa, man. We share all that, and I think one of the things I love about our team is we're so open to answer questions from people. So yeah, man.
Yeah, we do a 90-day review for new volunteers, and it's really just them reviewing us. Like none of the questions are about us reviewing them, and we totally stole most of the questions from North Point. The North Point talks about the questions they ask, and Andy has shared sometimes great questions asked. They're like the best one I've heard him say though is if you're new here, what do we do that doesn't make sense or seems off purpose? And what's great is you can really only ask that early on. Once you're a year in, you're part of it. You don't know anymore.
It becomes normal, right?
Exactly. So we do that. Love taking those things. The other thing I wanted to ask about because I do know about maps, like you mentioned, you all use maps. It's kind of a goal setting tool for your staff and things like that, and you share them so people could use them. But can you just briefly tell us what it is and how it works?
Sure. Well, Dan Ryland, who's our executive pastor, man, is just awesome and been doing this for ages. And there's, he's got blogs and all that detailed information where you can download copies. But basically, it's an opportunity to get clear. And so what happens is we do 3 a year. We do summer maps for the summer months. Then we do one for the fall, starting like basically September, October, November, December. And then we do January through May. And you sit down with your advisor, and it's basically over 3 things. The first one is the 4 or 5 points of your job description to make sure that that what you're assigned to do from HR is what your job is. Because, man, sometimes it just changes. Like we had one, it was like, hey, when we used to have a Saturday night service, we had one of them where it's like, hey, provide leadership to the nursery program on the Saturday night service. Well, that needs to change because when we launched 5 campuses, we got rid of our Saturday night services on all of our campuses. And so it was like, okay, that needs to change. Is what I'm going after the same? And that's a valid question to ask 3 times a year. The second one is like new territory goals. What are you going after that's new? I mean, it can be simple as like, hey, I've got to go hire this position. I've used things of like, one of them for me was to move from paper to digital when it came to check-in. And you would think, oh my gosh, who still does that? Man, we still have a lot of because it seems more efficient, but it creates a catastrophe because all the emails, man, a 1 looks like an I. And if you're off, you can't follow up. And then like all these information of being able to print out tickets automatically. And so it's new territory goals. It's goals you haven't gone after before. So it always challenges you to do things. And that's the second part of it is like 2 or 3 new territory goals. Sometimes those are aligned across the board. But those are unique and you work those out with your supervisor or with your coach. And the final one is just a personal development. What do you want to get better at? It could be, man, I've probably had a handful of people that have gone, I want to get better at finances. I want to get better at public speaking. I want to get better at writing better emails. That's a great one for some of those under 30. I want to get better at like managing my team, creating a meeting or something like that. And it's like, this is what I want to get better at, and this is how I'm going to do it. And so it's always attached to a process. So I want to get better at writing better emails. So I'm going to read this book, How to Write Better Emails. And I want to get better at meetings. So I'm going to interview 2 or 3 people. So it kind of puts the responsibility on the individual of what they're doing and what they're going after in order to better themselves. So it's a great tool. And then what we do is at the end of that semester, we review it see if they accomplished their goals and all of that stuff and what do they work on. When you have 2 or 3 goals, one of them is supposed to be relatively easy. One of them is supposed to be really kind of hard and maybe a little bit audacious, but but we still want to challenge you. You feel like, man, you can go after other things and what we're doing. And it kind of documents progress, also personal development. I mean, one of the things I hear about all the time is in churches, like, I don't feel like I'm developed. People give me the end goal, but they haven't told me how to get there. And I don't know. And then maybe I sink or swim. And I think for us, man, especially if you come in and say, man, I know I'm not really good at emails, help me get better. Man, that's such a better posture to have than like, bro, you can't send emojis to the executive pastor.
Nice.
But and that
Dan
happens.
doesn't like emojis?
No, man. Like, I've had people like, you can't go to your senior, leader and be like, hey, bro, here's my finance or like, all those kind of things that young leaders do. And I did them too. You just got to figure out how to get better at them.
Yeah.
And so with that review, there's a transparency of saying, okay, man, I'm not good at this. And for your boss to confer in that and say, okay, man, you can get better at this. And let's figure out, here's the process for you to get better as a personal leader, something that will transcend just your time at 12 Stone, but also, man, something that like, man, this is what you're going after. And then we do an evaluation called the Sevens once a year. And that's like an in-depth 2-hour kind of conversation with your boss on, man, the spiritual side, how have you sensed God growing, developing in your ministry? At the same time, like, there's practical sides. How are you a better leader from 12 Stone? How's 12 Stone a better church because of you? And listing out those things and going after them. So it's very tangible. I mean, I love in Proverbs where it says the wounds of a friend can be trusted. It's it builds so much intimacy between you and your boss for you to be able to like, dude, I know I just stink at email, or you know what? I'm not really good at one of mine early on, man. If I had to sit in front of my senior pastor, I just get tongue tied and I didn't know why, I'd be like, blah, blah, and I was like, so I went to my boss and I said, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. And he gave me some things to read and some opportunities. And honestly, my boss my senior pastor came in one time and said, hey, I want you to tell me something. You're going to have 10 minutes to just tell me something, what God's doing in your world and what your ministry is. And that was like my final test. I mean, my senior leader was so committed to my development that he said, I'm going to come in for 10 minutes because at the end of the semester. And I felt that for a semester. I had like, here's the drive. And then like halfway through, my boss was like, hey, how you doing? How are you doing with your maps? Are you guys looking at it? And, so it just challenges you to get better, so.
Yeah, and it's real practical. And you said you had the Sevens, like a review thing. Is it like 7 questions? Is that also something that is available to be shared?
You can coaching Sevens, Dan Ryland, any of that stuff, man. I mean, anything that's Dan Ryland's gold.
Oh, I know. You and I talk about it all the time.
Yeah,
I love everybody's got to go to danryland.com, REILAND, and just subscribe by email, read all the posts. I know he has the maps on there, which is great.
He has everything, man. I mean, anytime I have to go do a talk, I just basically go to Google and put Dan Ryland in quotations than the subject matter. And there's something, man. He's been the pastor's coach and all of that stuff, man. He's just so humble and loves for people to just take his stuff. He could care less if he gets credit for it unless it's copyrighted. But like, he's such a great guy to work for. So yeah.
Yes, it's great stuff. And I've loved subscribing to his blog. You're right. You could just take a series of posts and, make a breakout talk about it or something. It's so helpful.
Totally. Yeah.
It's really good.
Makes you feel like a genius. But we're all in this together, man. And that's kind of the purpose of what we're doing.
That's awesome. So you lead, obviously, multiple teams going on just in children's ministry, but you do lead student ministry too.
Yep.
And I think one thing for anybody that's listening that is in the role that we serve in, leading both, how do you unify them? And especially as the church gets larger and multi-site and all of that, you mentioned you do 2 trainings a year. I didn't catch if that was just children's or all of NextGen.
No, that's all in NextGen.
Okay, so that's probably part of it. But overall, how do you help keep that unified?
Well, that one time a month when we get all NextGen, the 61, that's all children's and students together as well.
Okay.
So sometimes, a lot of times we mix them up to just meet each other. I mean, I joke. You're right, though. I mean, I jokingly am probably the only one in the room that could name every person. So there's that. I think the key people are, especially in the spring, I am super intentional about making transitions from like elementary school into middle school, and then middle school into high school, super intentional about making those transitions as seamless as possible. So I put it really on like the middle school guy to spend time with the elementary person. So even at their campus, at other campuses and stuff like that. Now, the truth of the matter is the middle school person at our central campus isn't going to spend time with the 10-hour nursery person at our Brazelton campus.
Sure.
But that's okay. There's no real reason other than that once a month and those other trainings. And honestly, the once a month training, I have different people teach all the time. So I've brought up, 4 of our ministry, children's ministry directors have taught. I brought up a youth pastor and let him talk. I brought up a 10-hour person and let her talk, and so it's a shared leadership thing just to get some experience with that. So there's those kind of things. But I mean, like our middle school residents serve in 5th grade ministry and elementary ministry throughout the spring, throughout the summer. And the same thing happens. Our high school guys spend times in middle school, and teaches in there twice a semester so that as they grow up, we do a thing right now called Senior Sneak. That's for all of our seniors in high school. They spend time with the college pastor and their high school pastor from all campuses. The only thing about that is we only have one college ministry for all campuses. So that's a little bit unique, but like, we do it through small groups and those kind of components. I think when some of the stuff that we started with this kind of support.12stone.com has some forums. So if someone throws up a question, you're able to interact with each other and get information. A lot of that's done through me. I mean, a lot of it is like me connecting one person and saying, hey, they come up with a question. My first thought is there's somebody on my team that can answer this better or as good as me. And if they can, then I try to send it to them just to create that relational equity, because I don't want to only be the keeper of knowledge and keeper of authority. Because if not, then the ship doesn't move unless I move it. And that's the last thing I want to do. I want somebody to go to, like, if you've got a middle school question, man, Stephen Perry, who's our middle school pastor for 12 Stone, he's the only one that just does middle school. He's the person you need to go to first. Now, if the problem is Stephen Perry, then come talk to me. But that's so rare. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, how do I disseminate this information out when someone has these out for them? And giving them leadership times, man, to send out, to give them projects and side projects that affect us all. That helps. I've got guys that are great more on the accounting side, and they come up with a process. I let them send it out to all the NextGen staff, so they feel like they are owning something that's part of something bigger than themselves. So like paid childcare is a big thing right now, but I got 2 or 3 ladies that are some of our 10-hour, and they'll spend 30 minutes, but they'll present it like I may have given them the bulk of the stuff and they understand it, but I want them to feel like, man, I'm adding to the value of 12 Stone globally, not just to what I'm doing.
That's good. And there's a couple principles, or at least one principle in there that I thought we need to hang on to, and all of us can use. Doesn't matter how large your church is. You try to actively not answer questions somebody else could answer.
Yeah.
Right. So I think of, like, imagine a children's ministry leader and one of their elementary small group leaders has a question, rather than answer it, because you probably do know. And in some sense, you might be the expert on, at the location. Sure. But instead, you go to your best small group leader and say, hey, talk to them.
Yeah.
And one, it saves you time. Two, it builds their influence. That's really good. That's something we should. I know for me, I'm always having to do that with staff where we talk about like, what is your sandbox? Meaning inside the sandbox, you can make any decision you want. Outside, we need to talk. And I feel like I have to always push the sandbox boundaries out further because the tendency is to answer all the questions, which then makes it smaller for them, and they have to keep coming to me.
Sure.
That's good. That's one we could all work on. So you guys have.
But let me jump in real quick. But what doesn't mean is I'm disregarding their question.
Yes, definitely.
I don't want to feel like I'm passing it off. I want to feel like, hey, that's a great question. I mean, as a leader, if there's one little snippet I could give anybody, is when anybody responds to you from your team, the first few words should be like, great question, good job, like just an affirmation at the beginning. Hey, great question. Let me connect you with. And I mean, I start so many emails, but I want them to feel like, man, if they're coming to me, that there's a affirmative kind of response, the first 6 words. And it's like, that's a great question. I don't ever want to feel like I'm just answering like I'm a robot. I'm like, man, I hadn't thought about that. Or that's a great question. We answered it this way. And here we are. Like, if you start creating a culture where questions are welcome, then people don't feel silly. But then it feels like, man, hey, that's a great question, Nick. You know what? I have my thoughts on it, but let me connect you with Steven. He's awesome at doing that. And he'll be able to connect. Now you feel connected. The other person feels awesome, and everybody's connected.
That's good. And you have the the monthly all together things that helps. Like you're saying, you have some cross functional teams where they're working together and working on the transitions. That's good. And the 2 big trainings for volunteers, they're all together next gen too.
Yes, the 2 big trainings. Yeah, but then we'll do something throughout the year a few times where it's like, hey, we're bringing all the nursery people in together. And so we'll usually do those on like a Sunday afternoon. And then what I'll do is I'll have one of my maybe 29-hour person or like a coach or something like that. And they'll give them shared leadership, and they'll do a training for nursery workers, 3 or 4. So now you're in a room with 50 nursery volunteers, that are just, and we provide lunch for them. See, that's where the money and the stuff goes. When you say no to staff, you can say yes to like volunteers. I mean, we say no to staff so many times because we want to give money to volunteers and be able to have lunches and be able to do all of that stuff. So, like we have a middle school train, like, I have to do a mandatory reporting kind of thing. And we, those kind of what we call lunch and learns, which is awesome, man. It's like we bring in like, hey, we're having lunch for every elementary volunteer at Central Campus. We're starting to get big enough where we're going to have them like at different campuses to be able to do that and be able to say, okay, like we may even have them the same time. Tuesday or Sunday at 2 p.m., you can either come to Central Campus or Hamilton Mill, whichever one's closest. It's the same information. I may do a 5-minute video intro on something like that and it's shared, but we try to keep it real simple so that everybody feels like there's a connection and you're part of something bigger than yourself. Yeah,
and I think most leaders listening, a lot of staff here would be thinking, I just don't have the money in my budget to do that. And that's true. But you have to start doing, like you're saying, working in ways to find it elsewhere so that each year you can grow it. And the biggest one is staff. Now, a lot of churches would be stuck, but when you're like where you are, you have 5 full-time children's staff for 3,800 kids. You have a lot of part-time too, but I'm sure if you added up the part-time, you would still be really lean on staff.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're lean on benefits because with part-time, you're not paying for that. And you can turn around and put that money into volunteers. And the reality is it just goes so much further. Yeah, I mean, for what you pay a staff person for in a month, you could feed your entire volunteer team sometimes.
Well, and it's got to be in the right culture too. I mean, a lot of churches aren't comfortable with volunteers taking so much responsibility because then it's liability. But I had for Orange, we had somebody that was touring one of our campuses, and I took him over there, and they're like, "Hey, is that a teenager in a golf cart putting out cones and all stuff?" He's like, "Dude, our church would never let teenagers on a golf cart." Now, I'll be honest with you, 99.9% of teenagers, I wouldn't let on a golf cart.
Yeah, it's a
special exception. But I'm not going to say that across the board. I mean, like, there has to be some standards. But it's just because, like, the teenager that was on there, like, I know this girl, dude, like, I'd let her, like, do anything. I mean, she's been, like, it's those kind of responsible functions. She was 5. You know what I'm saying? Like, now, I wouldn't let 17-year-old Kevin Monahan do pretty much anything in my children's ministry.
Nice. Like, I can relate. Yeah, me neither.
But you know what I'm saying? But like I don't want to just eliminate that right out of the gate. I think it's just whenever you have a new position to hire, pause and say, man, can we parse this into different areas? Can we step back? Is it automatic to just fill in that gap? Or can you step back and say, man, maybe we could use this money a different way. Maybe there are some key volunteers to use, and maybe some other ways to use that money more efficiently where, man, can a volunteer? Maybe not, man. I'm not saying that's the only way to do it. Maybe you can't, I've been at a church where it's like, no, we always do that. And what's the senior pastor? Great, man. Follow his leadership and do whatever. But I'm just saying, if you can pause it, that's what we do. Whenever somebody leaves or kind of moves out, we all sit and say, okay, should we hire the exact same position, or let's evaluate it? And I think taking that hour with key staff people to evaluate, should this position look the same? Man, like that's been gold for us. So
yeah, it helps you change and adapt as you grow. That's probably really helpful. So the one other thing I want to ask you about, kind of the last question here about how this all works together, and this will be really helpful for anybody who leads in a multi-site environment. But again, I think it'll help all of us because all of us have different relationships and channels that we have to work with on staff. And so you're kind of like the ambassador, so to speak, of NextGen to every campus pastor. And I know you personally have good relationships with all of them. And it's hard to like quantify what that does, but it certainly helps everything work, right? Tell us about that. Why is it important? How does it work? And how can it relate to the person, who's at a church of 200 and they're just reporting to their pastor?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is, to share what we do, I am dotted line to most of the staff, which means I have influence over what they do, and but they're not my direct report. I only have 6 people that directly report to me, so everybody else is kind of like below that and all that stuff. But
and they
honestly,
report the other people, like in multi-site world. The dotted line just means you're not their boss, but you have influence. The solid line is like you report to them. So the other people, all those other staff that don't report directly to you, they report to their campus pastor.
Correct.
I imagine.
Correct.
Okay.
Most of them do. But I think there's a few things. I think first of all, if you lead from position or from a job, on org chart, you've already lost. Of course, you've got to have those schematics to make sure that everything goes clear, especially in the accounting and the accountability side, like money and all of that stuff, of course. But I do think that, man, like if you go in there and say I'm the boss, you've already lost because you're leading from position, right? But I think the key thing to do is so valuable is, it's kind of like playing mom and dad. Like I got 3 kids, like, my kids occasionally come to me and say, "Hey, Dad, can I go over to Areas? That's my daughter's friends." And I say, my first thing is, well, what does your mom say? Because she'll come to me and act like, even when my wife has said no, she'll come and say, okay, this is like no because of some other reason, whatever, my wife. And if my daughter's like, well, I didn't really ask. Okay, I'm good. My response is, I'm good if your mom's good. And I think it's the same way. I think sometimes people can play one another. There has to be a great relationship. And if you feel like there's conflict, then you have to really connect with that person. But I think the way you do that is speak their language. I have one campus pastor who just wants to be in the know about everything. So I know when we're doing something like a global training or something like that, or change that's happening, that I need to make sure that I'm sitting down with them. So I meet with every campus pastor about every 4 months. And my goal is just relational equity, whether there's something on the agenda or not. It's just, hey, how are you doing? What do you need to do? What can we get at? Can we have this relationship? But I also know I've got other campus pastors. They're like, hey, what is Monahan? That's what everybody calls me. What does Monahan think? And if I'm good with it, they're good with it. It's the same way, so there's guys that want to know every detail, and there's the guys that like, I don't care if I know any detail, so how do you have to speak their language a little bit and share with them what do they need to do? And I think it's always done out of respect. It's always done out of like the win, like who wins at the end that's not the win, because we all have to win. We all have to dive in there to a place of like, man, let's get at it and let's make it happen. And so I think there's understanding what they value, how they value the posture of it, and coming in and saying, man, I want what's best. And a lot of that takes time. I think the helpful part is like that's part of our culture, like when someone's hired, like if it's a NextGen thing, the campus pastor has to sign off on it. I have to sign off on it, and then Dan has to sign off. So there's this trend, like especially if they're in worship and students, then you got another person that comes in. The worship person, I have to sign off it, and the campus pastor. So from the get-go, there's already being created this kind of thing that, hey, we're together, and you can't pit mom against dad. You got to come in there and say like, man, you try to lie to my wife, it's a problem. I say to my kids all my time, like they get upset at my wife. I say, listen, you can't talk to my wife like that. Yes, you're my kids, but you're talking to my wife like that. I wouldn't let a stranger talk to my wife like that, So,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to let you got to respect that's my wife. And so there's a component of that I feel is so important in understanding who they are, their perspective, what they're going to do. And to be honest with you, man, like if you're great at what you do and you have a good chemistry with the team, they're going to come to you for influential stuff anyways. Like everybody knows to me, like, hey, if they wouldn't make that decision because they're like, man, I got to get the best people to make the decision. I wouldn't make a big decision without the campus pastor because I know what they value, and I want them to be included on this. So there's a lot of that. I get ahead. I send a lot of emails out like, hey, campus pastors, here's when we're doing, promoting this year. This is the time. Here's all the stuff. If you got any questions before I send this to everybody, let me know. And honestly, out of the 9, none of them replied back. I got one of them that usually asks a clarifying question, and that's it. I try to stay ahead of the game to show them that I'm trying to think how they would think.
Yeah,
so
that's good. And throughout everything you said, I just hear you serve them. Like you're there to help them,
man.
Serve them versus maybe going into your boss's office or your pastor's office and saying, this is what I need.
Oh,
you're
dude,
saying, how can I serve you? And every now and then you probably are going to say, hey, I need this. Can you help me with this?
Sure.
But when you've done it, when you've served them the last 9 times, they're like, oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Whatever you need.
Dude, and here's the thing is, man, if there are the 3 most powerful words at 12 Stone, and I think is help me understand. Like if you can walk into somebody and say, hey, Nick, help me understand your decision on this.
Yeah, I love that. We talk about that exact same phrase. I use it all the time with my pastor. If I shouldn't say all the time, I rarely have to use it. But if there is a disagreement and I can't quite figure out what it is, that's the phrase, because other phrases could mean the same thing but sound different. Why?
Yeah.
It almost sounds critical as opposed to questioning. And
I want to see your vantage point. I want to see what you're thinking because, as most of us act like we've got like 5 pieces of a 100-piece puzzle, and now, I know what it is. It's a bear in the woods. Well, it may be a dead bear in the woods and you just don't know yet. Like, and you may be the dead bear if you start jumping.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So it's like, it's like, man, figure out like what pieces you have and try to put it together and see from their vantage point, and you might be missing something. And if they're open enough, they're going to find out that they may be missing something, and like, let's solve the problem. Make the problem, not the person. So
yeah, I always learn something that way. You think why somebody feels a certain way or says something. And for some people too, a personality thing might be they have to think through it and talk about it to really tell you why.
Yeah.
I'm not wired that way. I pretty much know right away why I think that, usually. Yeah. But there are people who totally process it either internally or out loud. And if you don't ask the right questions, you're not gonna, what you get is like cut off. You
got to speak their language a little bit, man. I get it. Yeah.
That's good. You do that well, and obviously that helps everything there. But I think that's beneficial to all of us because we're all, accountable to someone or multiple people.
Sure.
That's a good thing. Well, this has all been really, really helpful, and we're going to have a ton of stuff to link in the show notes. You're probably going to win the prize for largest section of links.
What's the prize there, friend?
I don't know. I'm going to have to figure that out. Yeah, I'm going to have to figure that out. I'm going to try to get most of what I can get off of resources.12stone.org. Yep. But anything else I can't get, I'll email you. But we'll link it all on there, the map stuff and some of the feedback forms and things like that. There's just a ton of great stuff there. So we'll link that. But if anybody wants to connect with you, if they have any other questions or just want to learn or whatever, how can they do that?
Yeah, I think honestly the best thing is my email, and it's my name, kevin.monahan@12stone.com. And or you can go to 12stone.com/staff and then pull up my name on there. That's the none. You can follow me on Twitter or send me a direct message on there. That's the same thing at Kevin Monahan. And man, I'd be happy to connect through there. But I mean, honestly, email's the best thing through 12stone.com and do all that stuff. And man, I love talking shop and giving resources away. And if you've got something that makes us better, awesome, man, send it to us. I'd love to have that and see that. And I look forward. If there's any questions, please don't be timid to send that in, man. I love connecting with people and making stuff happen and learning and constantly going after it. So let's get some stuff done.
Yeah, that's awesome. Kevin, thank you so much for sharing all this with us.
Yeah,
it's been really helpful.
Pleasure. I appreciate it, man. You've been very kind. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yep.
Well, Kevin's a great guy, isn't he? I mean, take him up on his offer to reach out if you have any questions or if there's anything you think he could help with. He's just got tons of wisdom, and 12 Stone really does give away so much stuff. So here are the action items that I think of coming out of that interview. One would be get the free resources. Go to nickblevins.com/episode 9. And in there, I linked to 12 Stone's free resources that he talked about. Dan Ryland, he has great stuff. I linked to that there. I also linked to a resource page on my site that I just updated finally after years last week. So we have some of our volunteer onboarding documents and systems there that you can use, orientation handbooks, things like that, event kits, all that kind of stuff. And I linked to a page that I keep on my site that has free resources that other churches give away. So you'll want to check that out. That's one action item. Get some of that stuff, copy it, adjust it, and use it in your ministry. Another one would be that conversation about delegation and the sandbox. How can you help push down decision-making authority, so to speak, in your ministry so that you're not the one answering all the questions. You're not just the expert, so to speak. You're actually empowering other people. That would be a good step this week. Another one, an easy one, would be kind of at the end there. We were talking about how to serve our leaders. So as opposed to just always wanting something from them, what's one thing you can do this week for your leader to serve them? Or maybe you're going to get in a conversation where you have to use that phrase, help me understand. Help me understand. In fact, just last week, I was talking with a leader that I'm connected with here in this area, and we were talking about using that phrase because she's in a tough spot, not fully understanding what leadership wants to do. And so that phrase just is really important. It opens the door for conversation as opposed to saying something like why, or I can't believe this, or this doesn't make any sense, or anything that just puts you on different sides of the conversation. So those are a few action steps I think you could take coming out of this interview. I hope it was helpful for you. I certainly learned a lot. I'd appreciate it if you could share a rating and a review on iTunes. That helps spread the word. Really appreciate that. And make sure you subscribe, because in the next episode, I talk with Kristen Ivy from Orange. Kristen is the executive director of messaging for Orange, but she's also the director of the Phase Project. And so we talk about that. And Just a Phase is a project they started and got going to help leaders and parents connect with kids at every stage of their life and understand what's going on, what questions are they asking. And they're just doing so much to help empower us, parents and leaders, to serve kids well at every phase of their life. And we talk about that, what they're doing, what they're learning, and how you can use that in your church, and you don't want to miss it. So we'll see you in the next episode of the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.